Welcome back. You are listening to Nate the Hate on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Be sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And before we get into today's episode, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and healthy holiday season and a happy new year, which will be coming up in just a couple of days. And MVG, how was your holiday?
Nate, my holiday was really good. I am currently on a bit of a break from YouTube because there's really nothing going on right now, let's be honest, even though people are still making content, which is good for them. I just decided, look, it's time to just unplug for a couple of weeks and just recharge and actually enjoy playing video games rather than, you know, making it all about work and stuff. So I've had a very, very good break so far. I kind of don't really want to go back to making videos, to be honest. I'm kind of right in the middle of it right now. But of course, you know, 2022 is a new year. There's going to be a lot of really interesting things to talk about. So of course I will be making content again. But I'm having a good break, playing a lot of video games, getting caught up on the backlog, and just, you know, watching movies, watching Netflix, just generally unwinding and unplugging from the day-to-day stuff that I did in 2021. But how about yourself? How has your holiday been so far?
It has been enjoyable. Like yourself, I decided to unplug and, you know, just enjoy some of the simpler things in life, like, you know, pick up a book, enjoy some literature, watch some movies, play a few video games, but generally unplug, recharge those batteries, and get ready for what 2022 is going to bring us in, you know, just a couple of days. As you mentioned, there's going to be a lot of news in 2022. We're going to have plenty of topics to discuss for the coming year, including predictions and so forth for the upcoming year from the companies. And, you know, that's why for this episode, we're going to do an overview, a review of sorts of what 2021 was for Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. But before we get into today's topic, I have to remind everyone that this episode of Nate the Hate is brought to you by our favorite producers of ball trimmers, Manscaped. The global leaders in below-the-waist grooming are leaving 2021 with a new product. Clean yourself into the new year with their ultra-premium body wash. Also, special offer alert. Use the code Nate the Hate for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. 4 million men already trust Manscaped. Time to join them. And MVG, it's my understanding you have used this ultra premium body wash and other Manscaped products.
Absolutely, Nate. Big fan of Manscaped. I've been using their products pretty much since the start, since we started talking about them. But let me tell you, for those people that aren't on board with Manscaped yet, 2022 is on the way, and the last thing that you want to do is be the guy with pubes getting in the way of making this year your best yet. 2021 sucked, and that's why Manscaped is making a splash and upping your grooming game. Their signature Lawnmower 4.0 is here to take down every pube in its path. Manscaped engineering the ultimate groin and body trimmer by focusing on intelligent functionality and an incredibly comfortable grooming experience. The 4th generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents, thanks to their advanced skin-safe technology, and it's even waterproof. This tool is amazing, and I'm confident using the Lawnmower 4.0 to leave 2021 and my gross pubes with it. You know what else I'm confident about, Nate? You may be asking how, and I'm happy you did. I'm using Manscaped's refined cologne with the same signature scent that's in all Manscaped formulas, and it's a great complement for your collection. So, Nate, why don't you once again tell the fine listeners all about the discount they were offering for Manscaped customers?
Yes, you can get 20% off and free shipping with the code NateTheHate at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. And use the code NateTheHate. That's one word, NateTheHate. Happy New Year to your balls. And the first topic for this episode is going to be about Sony and the PlayStation 5 in 2021. As we know, this was the PlayStation 5's first calendar year, and with it came a lot of hype, anticipation, but also a handful of false promises from Sony themselves. But in many areas, I would say Sony succeeded in what they wanted to do with the PlayStation 5, and that is garner a lot of excitement and really strong hardware sales, which we have seen in each month NPD report. But at the same time, Sony has had its share of failures. And we're going to go over the strengths and weaknesses that Sony had in the calendar year of 2021. And we will also go into Microsoft and Nintendo's calendar year failures and successes. But what I want to start with Sony and the PlayStation 5 is their stronger aspects of the year. And one of their strongest elements of 2021 would be their acquisitions. This is a company that came out of the gate and made a big move following the release of Returnal when they announced that they had acquired Housemarque. And that wasn't the only acquisition they made throughout the year. They also went on to purchase studios that would help them with their PC ports, and another smaller studio, which I believe the name is Firesplit.
I think it's Firesprite.
Firesprite, that's it. And they had actually originally kind of been part of Sony Liverpool. And then they went on their own thing. And for Sony to acquire them means they have big plans for them as, in their future planning. But of these acquisitions, I would definitely say Housemarque is likely the biggest of Sony's acquisitions. And it seems as though Sony is beginning to lay that foundation of where they want to take the company moving forward. We've seen them do acquisitions in the past. They bought companies like Insomniac, and I mean, look how well that's worked out for them. Ratchet and Clank is one of their major IPs at this point. They have studios like Sucker Punch and titles like Ghost of Tsushima. And while none of these studios have that caliber yet, you can see that Sony is definitely looking to the future where they want to build up these companies so they can become the next Guerrilla or maybe the Insomniac for Sony internal. And it's fascinating to see Sony make these moves because for years, decades even, we've seen them make these mascot IPs with Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, kind of as a response to Nintendo's mascots of Link, Mario. And it finally feels as though Sony has that foundation laid where they are creating iconic characters for their brand. It's no longer just Kratos and Ratchet. Now you have Joel, you have Ellie from The Last of Us. You have the main character from Ghost of Tsushima.
Yep.
You have Cole from Infamous. And Sony's building up their brand to have these iconic names and characters. And it felt as though these acquisitions for this year is just another step in Sony really trying to solidify and grow their brand beyond just the box of PlayStation, but also into numerous other realms of entertainment, like we've seen with The Last of Us going to HBO. And we've seen them branch into more movie type deals. And it's really fascinating to see how Sony is using these acquisitions to make their brand more worldwide.
Yeah, I think you summed it up really well. They had, it was an interesting year for them. Like, it was obviously the first year, the launch year of the new hardware, and for all intents and purposes, I think it went fine for them. Where they lacked in games, especially in the second half of the year, I think the first half of the year was very well stacked, and I think for the most part, it was pretty good, really. The second half, obviously, it did slow up, but where they kind of lacked in kind of bringing that killer blow at the end of the year with something, they made up with acquisitions all throughout the year. And I think, they're setting themselves up for the future of PlayStation 5 and beyond. The other acquisition that you didn't mention was Bluepoint. I mean, I think that's another high caliber pickup. We knew that was going to happen. I mean, it was heavily rumored as soon as Demon Souls, dropped on the PS5. Everyone was saying Sony's going to acquire Bluepoint, and it almost took a year, but they got there eventually. So you just wonder what we'll see from the Sony camp in the next few years. But I think it's going to be a lot better, I think. I think next year is going to be a big year for Sony. We know that they've got some big games on the roadmap that they're going to show us. And, these acquisitions are really setting themselves up for the future of the company and the brand. So, yeah, look, if you're not making games and you're not shipping games, then, the next best thing you can do is acquire studios that will help you get there. And, it's not just Sony that did it. Obviously, Microsoft has as well. And we'll talk about them later on. But look, overall, I think they had a pretty decent year. It was not all gold. Not everything was a hit for them. They certainly missed the mark in some areas, but overall, it was a pretty decent kind of first year for PS5 and the brand.
Yeah, like acquisitions are definitely something that I would say the base community may not feel that excitement or understand why it is a big deal. But from a business standpoint, acquiring companies like Housemarque or Bluepoint, it's a major win for Sony as a developer and a publishing house. And we as the fans and the consumer will eventually be able to consume those fruits.
Right.
It's going to take years because the tree was just planted. But when we get the fruits of their labor in the next several years, that's when we finally feel rewarded for that acquisition. And Bluepoint, as you mentioned, we got Demon Souls at launch.
Yep.
But up to this point, Bluepoint has really been that art restoration studio.
Yes.
They have not created anything of their own. And what's curious is how they said their next project is going to be an in-house original IP. So we're finally going to see how talented the studio truly is when it comes time to create their own property. And that's something that I, as a fan of the company and also of the PlayStation, am curious about. I want to see what Bluepoint can do on their own. We know their skill at remaking and remastering the work of other creators. But if they can step forward and show that they have the chops to produce high quality original content, that acquisition by Sony is only going to shine brighter moving into the future because they could potentially make this another pillar of their North American development studio.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely right. Look, I think Bluepoint is the most interesting one out of the acquisitions this year. Obviously, Housemarque do quality work, and they always will deliver something really great. But like you said, I think the biggest unknown quantity is Bluepoint and what they've got. Because yes, I mean, if you're I don't want to say a port studio, but I mean that's effectively what Bluepoint has been for such a long time. They didn't need those roles, the writers and the narrative people, involved in the games, because they were just kind of making ports, right? But now they're making games from scratch, so they've obviously brought in a lot of new talent to the studio to help them get there. So it's a risk for them because I feel like they're getting into waters they haven't really gotten into in the past. But I also think it's exciting, and if they're taking that step, and Sony's obviously backing them to do that, then I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what they have for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, they're definitely that studio that you want to look at and see what that growth can bring about. And as you mentioned with Housemarque, they were already an established developer. We know the quality of releases they can put out. And when you look at a title like Returnal, they can now expand that type of premise because they're going to have that financing from Sony by being part of that corporate umbrella. Though they were contracted and given exclusive clauses with Sony in the past, now they have their full commitment. So titles from Housemarque can only grow and evolve from here. And that's exciting because the gameplay they put out in their titles has always been elite.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. For me, I think Returnal is that game that's just continuing to age like fine wine. It's one of those games where it keeps getting better. And look, I think it's going to be kind of the Bloodborne of the PS5 generation, the way it's turning out. It's going to be so beloved. It already is, right? But I mean, a couple of years from now, people are going to really think fondly of that game and going to ask for sequels. And all that stuff that comes along with it. So I'm a big fan of the game, and I'm glad they patched the game to the vision that it should have been in the first place. And I think it's an excellent game, and it deserves its success.
That's a good segue into the software topic that we'll go into for 2021 with Sony. And Returnal was definitely their first big release of 2021 in terms of PlayStation 5 exclusives. Because, yes, you had Destruction Derby All-Stars that came out in, I believe it was February, and went to PlayStation Plus.
Yep.
And pretty much died on the vine almost immediately. The fruit withered and fell. And it was quickly forgotten. Everyone was looking forward to MLB The Show or Returnal. They wanted that true SSD showcase. They wanted to see what the PlayStation 5 could truly deliver. And Returnal was that first game to do it. And as you mentioned, it has garnered a lot of love over the months. When it launched, especially in a dubious state that it was, where it was crashing, you couldn't save the game, you couldn't shut off your PlayStation 5, you entered rest mode, you turned it on, the system crashed, you lost all your progress. It launched in a very rough state. They have addressed all of these flaws now, and people are finally really able to immerse and enjoy the game the way it was intended. And the gameplay is exquisite. The gameplay loop is probably Housemarque's best effort. It's absolutely thrilling, an absolute joy to play. After Returnal, we went to Ratchet and Clank. This was a game that Sony had originally promised to be in the launch window. It did face a slight delay. And when it finally came to market, it was definitely hyped. This was a game people were looking forward to. They wanted to see the Rift mechanic, this concept that Sony had promised would really utilize and take advantage of the SSD and its blazing fast, And as good as the game is, and it is a very fun game, I don't believe it fulfilled the promise to demonstrate what an SSD can do for game design. A lot of the tricks used by the game, these were tricks that were already done on a standard hard drive. And that's definitely an area where the game I kind of look back at and say, do I feel misled? Yes. Did it ultimately ruin my enjoyment or my time with the game? No. But I wish the Rift mechanic was truly that revolutionary SSD defining moment for game design that it appeared that Sony and Insomniac were marketing.
Yeah, I agree. Look, at the end of the day, it's a Ratchet and Clank game, and all of them are excellent. So there's nothing wrong with Ratchet and Clank. I think it's a fantastic game, one of the highlights of the year, without question. But yeah, I mean, the technical side was marketed. It was genius marketing. Let's be honest. They really kind of honed in that Rift mechanic kind of SSD thing, that it was not. I mean, they never said it wasn't possible on anything before the PS5. All they said was, this is what the PS5 can do, and they marketed it perfectly. And what's interesting is, when you kind of get as technical as that, it's very easy to lose people, or for people just to say, this, I don't even know what they're talking about. This doesn't make any sense. But they really showcased, the power of the hardware. Even though at the end of the day, it wasn't really anything special from, that it's only uniquely available on the PS5, as we realized as soon as we started playing the game that, no, I mean, this has been done before. In fact, I think about Jak and Daxter, like the first one, there's games that have come out like during the PS2, Xbox, GameCube era where, the entire game would just stream in. There was no loading. I mean, it's not really anything kind of groundbreaking, but for some reason, Sony really did some good homework on that as a marketing feature, and it worked, and you have to give them kudos for it,
And see, after Ratchet and Clank, Sony really didn't have another major exclusive release for the PlayStation 5. They went back to some of the PlayStation 4 releases where they gave definitive editions of Death Stranding. We got the definitive or director's cut of Ghost of Tsushima with a expansion, which they're fine releases. They simply were not exclusive to the PlayStation 5. They were still PS4 cross-gen games. So I would say kind of in the calendar year of 2021, we still aren't fully aware of what the PlayStation 5 hardware can do. And this was really exemplified when Sony came out numerous times over the course of 2021 to announce software delays. Early in the year, they announced that Gran Turismo 7 would not make the intended 2021 release date. They got that out of the way very early. A lot of people had doubts the title would make 2021 to begin with. Then the year kept ticking, and we find out that Horizon Forbidden West isn't going to make 2021. That will find itself releasing in early 2022. Some felt misled with that title because they waited and waited to announce that delay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely from a marketing point of how long do we want, how much uncertainty is there from the developers' end of when they can get the game done, when it will go gold. And, as the consumer, you're going out there buying the PS5 to play a game like that at its best, only to find out it's been delayed into early 2022. Is it a huge delay in the grand scheme of things? No. But I can see as a consumer, you may feel as though you were misled on what was coming out in 2021. But the biggest would have been God of War Ragnarok.
Yep.
This is a title that never had a chance of coming out in 2021.
No chance.
Why Sony opted to even put that year at the end of the trailer last year where they showed nothing. They showed a logo and said 2021 is definitely a bit of marketing trickery. They wanted people to believe this huge sequel was going to come out in 2021 for the PlayStation 5, get people really excited about the promise of what the PlayStation 5 could bring gaming, and then wait until mid-year or the second half of the year and say, it's actually coming out next year, and we can't give you an exact release date.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we know there's been numerous circumstances surrounding COVID and game development. We just had Square Enix come out just this week to announce that Final Fantasy 16 is going to come out more than half a year later than originally intended due to the complications that COVID had presented. And this definitely was the case with Ratchet and Clank, Gran Turismo, Horizon, God of War Ragnarok, and numerous delays that plagued the industry. But it was definitely one of Sony's weaker points in 2021 is that in 2020, they promised this robust software lineup of PlayStation 5 exclusives up to that point with some of these titles, only for 2021 to come and they announced numerous software delays, and also that some of these titles are going to be cross-gen release. Now, I don't have a problem with cross-generation releases. I think it's good that titles like Horizon can be played on a PlayStation 4 because there are hundreds of millions of PlayStation 4s out there. The PlayStation 5 continues to be scarce in allotment in all regions. So it's good that people will be able to play this high release, high profile game. But at the same time, I can see why the consumer and the fan could feel a bit frustrated that titles like Gran Turismo were not announced as cross-gen releases when they were presented to fans last year, and only to find out that the title's been delayed and now it is a cross-gen release. You can't help but feel a little deflated if that's a title that made you anxiously search out a PlayStation 5 last holiday or even in the first half of 2021.
Yeah, look, you nailed it. Like, they kind of really dropped the ball with some of the communication, with both on games that we knew were never going to come out, and then pivoting to say that, oh, by the way, they're coming out on the PlayStation 4 as cross-gen games. And like you, I don't have a problem with cross-gen games. In fact, I think Horizon and God of War, I've said this numerous times. I'm almost positive that those games started development on PlayStation 4 hardware anyway. So they were always going to be cross-gen games that have been in development for a while. But yeah, I mean, look, they really need to do a better job, and hopefully they will, right? I'd like to think that these missteps that they've made are truly something that are in the rearview mirror for them, and moving forward, they will communicate with more transparency and be as real as possible about, the coming dates of things. Look, even if you just stick a year on something and say 2023, that's good enough. That's good enough for most people to say, okay, well, this game is not coming out next year or whatever. So I think at the end of the day, they did mess that up. And, there was a lot of unhappy people about it from what I remember. And I guess the other thing that Sony needs to do a better job on is communication of price increases when there is a PlayStation 5 version that gets announced. There was the thing about Horizon Forbidden West with the $10 upgrade charge, if you recall, Nate, and then they pivoted back to making a free upgrade. But it seems like every game that gets a PS5 upgrade has its own pricing structure almost. It's not a across the board $10 upcharge. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. And I think they need to do a better job with that as well. And we saw that with Final Fantasy VII Remake retrograde, Intergrade, whatever it's called. And then just recently with what was the last thing that the Uncharted double pack also has an upgrade charge as well. So, stuff like that they really need to do a better job on as well. I think the Forbidden West kind of backlash was warranted, and there were a lot of unhappy people about that. I look at the Uncharted one, and it's almost the exact same thing as Forbidden West, but I guess the difference is Uncharted has already come out, and it's a much older game that people don't really. I don't want to say they don't care about, but like it's not really as important to most people. So I think Sony really needs to do a better job with the price of upgrades around their games, and don't just gate people into the PS5. I mean, look, if you don't want people to pay the $10, then you shouldn't force them to do so. And you are forcing them to do so because you're removing the existing versions off the PS4 store, so they're not available anymore. So ultimately, you have to find a physical copy of those games, which, again, there's probably ways you can do that. I'm not saying it's rare or anything, but you really need to be more open with, the pricing structure of these upgrades that you're doing as well. I think that for me, that and the communication around PS4 cross-gen games, or the lack of communication, I should say, are probably the two biggest stumbles that Sony have had this year.
Yeah, Sony's marketing definitely had its share of stumbles, which is kind of fascinating because their marketing is so masterful when it comes to selling hardware and even presenting software with their trailers. They get people excited. They get that hype. They see huge sales. And then they make a blunder with the pricing, as you mentioned. And they typically recover from it, or it's just a case of gamers have short memories. You're mad in the moment. 2 weeks later, you kind of forget about it. The game comes out. You get mad again for a day. You say, it's $10. I'm going to buy it anyways because I want to play the best version of the game. And the cycle continues to repeat. And Sony and their marketers and all their testers, they know this. They know this going into it, that the gamer is going to forgive and forget. And that's why we continue to see it utilized by so many companies. But with Horizon Forbidden West, it was definitely that case of we promised a free upgrade because at the time, Horizon Forbidden West was looking like a launch window game. It essentially got delayed a full year. And I think Sony wanted to try to pull a fast one on people, saying maybe they won't remember that fine print or that blog post we put out a year ago because the game was delayed. So we're not obligated to any promises that we may have made at that time. People call them out, rightfully so. They did the right thing. But it's definitely a case of, as the consumer, that is a case where you're reminded that these businesses are not your friend. They will exploit you whenever possible. And just because they walked back Horizon Forbidden West does not mean they are going to walk back any other future planning. They're just going to find a new way to make you feel comfortable, and then they're going to introduce a new system in their pricing structure to find a means to exploit you. And as you mentioned, like the Uncharted Dual Pack, that is a release that I will not give $10 for.
No.
Because the upgrades do not justify $10 to me.
Exactly right. They don't justify the upgrade.
No, those, like, even the way they worded it, they even made it sound underwhelming.
Yeah.
It's just the funniest thing. It's not like these aren't remasters.
Yeah, I mean,
and they're charging you basically $10 to say, hey, the 4K is better than it was on the PlayStation 4 Pro, and the frame rate's a little better. That's $10.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to downplay, and I definitely don't want to, criticize the developers, right? But like, to me, this sounds like they've unlocked the frame rate, they've increased the resolution, they haven't, provided any new assets, any like high res textures or anything, and they've added, haptic feedback controls and some DualSense features, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you are taking advantage of the PS5 power, but at the end of the day, if you've already played the game and you've experienced it and you've enjoyed it, it's not really worth the money, in my opinion.
No, and keep in mind that this dual release will not have the multiplayer of Uncharted 4 or Lost Legacy. So you're actually getting less content if you were to buy these as brand new games and not just getting Uncharted 4 or Lost Legacy used on the PlayStation 4 and popping in your PlayStation 5.
Right.
So, I mean, overall, I would view Sony's 2021 as a year of turmoil. Overall, they had strong hardware sales.
Yeah.
They did put out some quality software. They had their COVID moments when it came to delays. But as far as Sony as a business, I think they're very satisfied with what they saw from the PlayStation brand this year. And as we have seen in recent weeks with the reports going into 2022, Sony is looking to revamp PlayStation Plus by merging it with PlayStation Now and finally introducing some of the legacy software from legacy consoles, including the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and PlayStation Portable. And that's something that fans are definitely looking forward to because they've wanted to play PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 games on their PS5s for, basically since launch. The big question is going to be pricing. By merging up PlayStation Now, is Sony going to come in at a competitive price point that is welcoming to the consumer, or are we looking at a pricing structure that is more in line with Microsoft's GamePass subscription model? We'll find that out in early 2022. But overall, for 2021, I think Sony had the best year they could, considering all of the circumstance.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they had a pretty decent year. They also sold 10 million PS5s as well. So look, overall, they could definitely go into next year with a lot of momentum and feeling pretty confident about the future.
One thing I do want to touch on before we move off of Sony is that in 2021, we did see Sony's complete abandonment of Japan.
Yes, you're right. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's definitely another area for me where I feel like it was a misstep, and it may be something that potentially really could hurt their brand. People are going to laugh at me and say all Sony cares about is big blockbuster games, over the shoulder, narrative-driven storyline games. Look, you're right, and they're going to sell millions and millions and millions of copies of those games and make millions of dollars. But those quirky Sony Japan studio games really is the fabric of what PlayStation is. It's what PlayStation, the brand, means to many people, not just me. The Patapons, the Loco Rocos, all those amazing games that came from Japan studio for so many years are lost, and that really does hurt for me. It's something that I feel like, even though Sony is saying Japan is still important to them and they're looking at ways to get a foothold in Japan again, I mean, you just have to see what's going on, and it doesn't really seem like it's really that important to them at this time.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you see this type of consolidation, it's definitely a cause for alarm. And as you mentioned, those titles like Patapon, Loco Roco, Parappa the Rapper,
Mm-hmm.
all those type of titles are now lost. And Sony kind of has a trend of doing this. We saw them consolidate in Europe during the PlayStation 3 era, where we have now lost out on Wipeout.
Yeah.
We've lost out on a lot of these iconic PlayStation IPs. And their focus on these Western over-the-shoulder type of titles, it makes sense in the moment. But is this a long-term strategy that is going to bring success? That's to be determined. These are the Hollywood-style games are popular now. Will they be popular in 5 years? And when you look back at that legacy of software that Sony created on the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 with titles like Ape Escape, Hot Shots Golf, those were titles that transcended numerous generations because they were fun. They had that casual appeal where anyone could pick up the game and play and enjoy it. When you start pivoting to The Last of Us, God of War, Days Gone, Ghost of Tsushima style games as your bread and butter, you're limiting that appeal to a sect primarily of that 18 to 40-year-old gamer, which I understand those are the individuals with disposable income. They're the ones who are going to be buying those types of games in droves.
Yep.
But at the same time, you're limiting that self to that more adult market. Whereas that's why you have titles from Nintendo that appeal to everybody in the family. And that's why they have that worldwide appeal and success. And hopefully in 2022, maybe even 2023, we can see Sony kind of pivot back to those type of titles. Like you have it with Ratchet and Clank, but you need more. And it is a shame to see Sony Japan Studios be shut down because they were the developers who could output those type of titles and really give that unique, quirky gaming experience. And, you know, I hope we see the return of that one day with Sony. And now we can go into Microsoft because, like Sony, Microsoft actually had a very similar year. Microsoft started the year with a big acquisition when they bought Bethesda and ZeniMax and immediately added dozens of developers into their corporate umbrella. And this led to a lot of discussion over the course of 2021. What titles would be exclusive? Would titles go multi-platform? And what is curious is in 2021, we did find out that Starfield will be an Xbox exclusive release, but we also saw Bethesda put out a multi-platform game with Quake, which kind of shows that maybe the bigger releases will go Xbox exclusive, but there's still going to be those releases here and there that will find a way to multi-platform.
Yeah, I mean, as someone obviously who was intimately involved in that project, I will tell you that I was a little surprised, you know, when we were working on Quake at the time, Nate, and it was multi-platform, obviously. And then when the deal got done with Bethesda and ZeniMax being acquired by Microsoft, we were wondering, you know, are we still going to work on all the other versions of the game? And the message was, yes, you are. You know, we still want to do that. And I mean, you don't ask why, you know, but I guess at the end of the day, the reasoning is because, you know, there are going to be, I don't want to say small releases, but there are going to be releases that will end up being cross-platform. Now, whether that is true in the future after, you know, existing contracts have been fulfilled and existing obligations have been fulfilled, I don't know. That really does remain to be seen. You know, there's two different camps here. Everyone, you know, some people believe that everything will be exclusive to Xbox and Game Pass. And then there are others that say, well, maybe some games may not be. And honestly, Nate, I don't really know. Like, I don't really know which way is you know, is the way that Microsoft is going to want to go here. But look, at the end of the day, Microsoft had a pretty decent year. Like you said, very, very much shades and similar kind of ways of what Sony had as well, but I kind of flip it around a little bit because I feel like Microsoft started extremely slowly and then found momentum in the second half of the year. But in the first half of the year, that big acquisition really kind of gave them a lot of momentum anyway. And then there was, I think, another key moment for me was the Game Pass announcement for MLB The Show. That was a pretty big deal when that was announced earlier in the year, if you recall. Again, if you don't play baseball, or if you're not a baseball fan, it probably means nothing to you. But looking at the big picture, that was a pretty big get for Microsoft to get that day one on Game Pass under the nose of Sony, or I don't know if it was under the nose, but they got it before Sony did, right? So that's pretty huge. But Microsoft did come good in the second half of the year. Some big releases, obviously, at rounding that out with Halo. Just literally just a few weeks ago, the campaign finally made its way to us. Finally shipped, and I think now Microsoft can kind of rest easy and say, look, we accomplished everything that we said we were going to do this year for the most part. And like Sony, I think they're going into next year with quite a bit of momentum. They've got Starfield, obviously, is the big anchor game that will be a holiday game next year. And what else we will see? They've obviously got a big portfolio of games. Will Hellblade 2, make an appearance next year? It might. It still may be a 2023 game, but there is a lot of speculation and a lot of questions around Microsoft. But I think that next year potentially could be their best year. It may be difficult to say that right now because we don't really know what's coming other than Starfield. But Microsoft does have the potential of having a great year next year as well. So, look, I think, like you said, Nate, I think a lot of similarities with Sony. They just, both of them kind of did things in very similar ways. They just kind of went about those methods in different ways. But ultimately, I kind of rate them pretty much the same as Sony as far as how they ended up in 2021.
Yeah, Microsoft's 2021 was definitely a curious year. And I recall earlier this year when we were talking about the PlayStation and Xbox competition going into 2021, we said Microsoft just has to survive. And this was at a time when we thought Sony was going to have Gran Turismo, Horizon, maybe God of War all come out in those first 12 months. And obviously none of those happened. But Microsoft has survived, and it was really on the backbone of Game Pass. As you mentioned, we didn't get a major first-party published title from Microsoft until the second half of 2021, when we saw Flight Simulator, or we can go even further with Forza Horizon 5, come to market. Up to that point, Microsoft was surviving on Game Pass and Game Pass deals with third parties like Outriders, MLB The Show, The Medium, titles like that to make people invested in the ecosystem that is the Xbox and Game Pass. And the fact that Microsoft was able to do that as well as they have really shows the strength of the service. And it also shows strength to the hardware line that they've brought to market with the Series S and the Series X. If you look at the Japanese sales of each week, Xbox is performing admirably.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not at numbers like the Switch or even the PlayStation 5, which isn't doing fantastic in Japan. But the Xbox is putting up a valiant effort for what the Xbox is for that region. It is selling sometimes 4,000 units a week. It's typically around 1,500, maybe 1,800, depending on supply. But that is good for the Xbox. And it shows the Series S is actually appealing to that market. And Game Pass is something that the Japanese market is responding to. And the inclusion of xCloud is something that the Japanese market is also responding to because they can play the games on their phones. And mobile gaming is a big thing in that region. So to see Microsoft finding success in the Japanese area in 2021 is really quite remarkable, and something that I'm sure Phil Spencer and everyone at Microsoft is looking at and saying, we have to continue to make Game Pass deals with titles like Dragon Quest XI, the Yakuza series, which is unfortunately being removed from Game Pass at the end of the year. But they're making those type of deals to appeal to that demographic, and they're going to major Japanese developers and publishers to put their games on Game Pass. So Game Pass was really the strength of Microsoft in 2021. And I'll even go as far as saying the Series S was also a strength of Microsoft. We've seen some reports come out that the Series S was actually leading in sales in certain regions, largely because there was more supply of the Series S than the Series X. But that affordable entry point that the Series S is allowing people to adopt this new generation of gaming and just kind of enjoy it, especially in its infancy when there's so few major next-gen only releases. It's a good means of just being introduced. But Microsoft also suffered from marketing missteps, just like Sony. And one of their biggest missteps was at the start of the year when Microsoft tried to raise the price of Xbox Live by double.
Ooh, that was rough.
It was bad, and they were called out on it. They immediately rescinded it, and they even came out and said, you know what, everyone who called us out, you're right. This price hike is asinine, and we're not going to do it anymore. And it was another case, kind of like Sony, where the consumer voiced their anger about a situation, and the companies listened, saying, you were right to call us out on this. We're not doing it anymore. But that was definitely Microsoft's biggest marketing blunder of the year, was the Xbox Live Gold price hike, or attempted price hike.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I'm trying to think of other times, but for me, that was probably the big standout where, yeah, they clearly missed the mark on that one. You know, it was something that they really shouldn't have done in the first place, and maybe just gotten some feedback testing or some sample testing from anyone that wasn't a bunch of yes men at the end of the day, you know. But look, you know, it's also very encouraging to see that the public really does have a voice in these things. Look, you know, Twitter outrage is something that, you know, I get on Twitter every day and there's people upset about things, you know, but in some cases the outcry is justified, and this one was definitely one of those situations. The Horizon Forbidden West price increase was justified, and I think it's important to call out the big hardware holders. You know, that if you're messing something up, then you need to be told about it. You know, and yeah, look, to Microsoft's credit, they quickly reversed that decision that they had made. They didn't, you know, dwell on it or try to, you know, convince people, you know, we'll see how it goes after 6 months. They reversed it immediately, and I think that was the right choice for them.
Absolutely. Now, where Microsoft didn't have a blunder like Sony, it was Microsoft really didn't have any software to delay, because Microsoft's roadmap for 2021, as far as we knew back in 2020, it was followed because they really didn't have any software for 2021. And we knew that going into this year. We kind of just hoped that they would make meaningful Game Pass additions, which they did. But software-wise, all we really had to look forward to was Forza Horizon 5.
Yep.
Psychonauts 2, which was multi-platform. Deathloop, which was PlayStation 5 exclusive despite being made by a Microsoft studio. And Halo Infinite. And the only uncertainty out of all these titles was whether or not Halo Infinite would actually make its 2021 release date, because all throughout 2021, there were rumors that the game's state wasn't in a great place. Despite the year delay, it was still going to come in rough, etc., etc. And game came to market December 8th. multiplayer launch November 15th.
I mean,
all in all, I mean,
it was coming in pretty hot, wasn't it? And look,
yes,
I'm gonna say this, and if Rand is listening, or Colt Eastwood, or Jeff Grubb, I apologize, but I've played the Halo campaign, and it is clear to me that this game was rushed out. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but there are parts of that game that is completely unfinished. So you know that they were really grinding hard at the 11th hour to get that campaign ready to launch. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad game. I like the campaign. I think it's good, but you can tell that they really, really crunched to get this game out for the holiday, even with that year delay that they gave themselves. The multiplayer side is beautiful. Chef's kiss. I love it. I think other than a few tweaks that it needs new maps and all that stuff. I think the multiplayer side is excellent. The single player side, you can tell it needs more work. The open world sandbox is fantastic, and I love that about it. But there's also parts of the game that are just grossly unfinished, and you can tell. And it doesn't take someone who's a game developer to see it. Anyone can see it that has played Halo games in the past, that there are literally sections of the game where nothing is happening, and you can tell that they really just need some more time. But hey, look, I'm glad that they shipped the game finally. We don't have to talk about Halo Infinite. When it's coming out again, because I think we've talked about it so much over the last 18 months. I am glad it's out. And look, shipping games is hard, right? We've said that before. And this was the way that they decided to do it. They kind of piecemealed the game, which I don't necessarily agree with. But in the end, look, I'm glad that the game finally came out.
Now that the year is at its end, and we know what the major releases were from Sony and Microsoft, which of the two do you think had the stronger exclusive lineup from first party in the calendar year?
Man, this is a tough question. It's easy just to say one of them, but then I think about the other one and be like, well, it's kind of even. Can I say it's a tie? Can I say that?
You can say that.
I'm totally sitting on the fence. No, if I had to pick one, Nate, only because I'm a big flight simulator fan, I'd give it to Microsoft.
Okay.
But if I didn't care about Flight Simulator, and a lot of people don't care about Flight Simulator, they probably would say Sony was kind of the winner. But I'm going to give it to Microsoft.
I mean, it definitely comes down to your taste in games because, as we mentioned, Microsoft really only had Flight Simulator, Forza Horizon 5, and Halo Infinite. Sony had Returnal, Destruction Derby, All-Stars, Ratchet and Clank, the Ghost and Death Stranding remasters, Deathloop. They had more of that variety versus Microsoft.
Here's the thing, right? They gave us enhanced versions of Ghost of Tsushima and Death Stranding and Final Fantasy VII, right? But how is that different than like the 60 FPS patch that Prey got for GamePass? You see what I'm saying? Like,
right?
Do we really count those into the equation? Because then I could say, well, Microsoft gave us a huge dump of backward compatible games, at the end of the year for their 20th anniversary. 115 titles. So
true.
I don't know if I would factor that in, but I also could argue that they should be in there as well. If you are upgrading Ghost of Tsushima and you are adding DLC to the game, then I guess it needs to be part of the conversation as well. But I never really considered it though, I guess.
See, that's where Microsoft's strength of the year, especially when you factor in like the Game Pass element, is also that backwards compatibility focus. Unfortunately, it does seem as though they have exhausted all their options and they've reached a limit. What's going to be added to backwards compatibility is there. They have said there's going to be no future editions at this time, at least planned. Hopefully that changes because there's definitely a lot of games that Microsoft is now in ownership of that should be added or that they still own that I'm not sure why they're not added to backwards compatibility, like Project Gotham.
Yeah, right.
But like Microsoft's focus in 2021 really felt as though they knew they had no major exclusive launches, and they needed to find ways to make the system engaging to people. So they leaned on Game Pass, made those deals with MLB The Show, Outriders, etc. And they also looked at that legacy of software and said, what can we get to put on the system? Let's get Max Payne. Let's get the Max Payne trilogy. And let's increase the resolution and frame performance from some of those older games. Let's make the entire Gears of War trilogy 120 frames a second. Or they went about it in such a unique way. And all of this was no extra charge to the user.
Right.
It was, you have the system, you get to benefit from all these upgrades. And that's amazing from the consumer point of view of, I'm just getting free upgrades. I'm getting auto HDR on Xbox 360 games. If you have a TV with HDR, you're getting all these benefits. And at no point did Microsoft try to nickel and dime you. They really played to their strength of catering to the consumer with tinsel and decoration, where ultimately, were any of these things a major deal at the end of the day? Or were they simply just, these are bright and shiny and they're exciting in the moment?
No, I don't think so. Let's be honest. I mean, I love backward compatibility, and I'm very sad that it's gone, at least for the time being. We won't see it. Hopefully it'll come back at some point, but for now, I mean, the message is pretty clear that this is the last update. But look, yeah, you're right, Nate. I mean, I think Game Pass and backward compatible games really kind of help Microsoft get through the initial part of, the year, the first 6 months, if you will, because there was really nothing else that was going on. So, hey, here's a bunch of old Bethesda games that we've patched, Here's 50 Cent Blood in the Sand that you can play on your Xbox Series S, right? I love that stuff. And I love the fact that, the Xbox Series S and X has a massive library of games that it can play from across 3 generations, 4 generations even. And look, at the end of the day, it's really great. And I love that they're honoring their legacy and they're doing everything that they can to preserve their history and their legacy. But yeah, look, they're just shinies, like you said. They're cool things that you'll play. And I went back and just played Max Payne 3 in its entirety from start to finish. I loved it. Had a great time. But it's one of those things where it's a really cool feature, but it's not necessarily something that is going to really help their bottom dollar at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is going to sell more Game Pass subscriptions and hardware sales is the big AAA blockbuster games, the Starfields, the Redfalls, all the games that are coming out, the Fables, the Perfect Darks. Those are the things that they really need to focus on. And look, I think they know that as well, that they have to really start to hunker down for the future. They dug themselves out of the Don Matrick era. And look, credit to Phil, because I felt like maybe they wouldn't, maybe that the Xbox brand would just kind of taper off and it would just die eventually, right? And I think Phil really has turned it around, not only with some great hardware, but some great decision making and some great acquisitions as well. So, now it's up to them to really just continue with this momentum that they finished this end of the year with, and hopefully they can go into next year with an even better year than 2021.
Yeah, I mean, right now, based on the lineup we know from Microsoft, they're definitely going to start 2022 similar to 2021. Like, we know Stalker 2 is coming to Game Pass. We know Halo Infinite will continue to evolve with updates and new additions, be it maps, weapons, we know Halo Infinite is basically a games as a service. It's going to evolve over the course of the generation for years to come. But it does feel as though moving into 2022, Microsoft may find themselves once again kind of in that position of they have to leverage Game Pass and get those third-party deals made, make the platform really appealing, which, I mean, they did in 2021. But that's kind of one of those tricks where you can only do it for so long until you do begin to see behind the curtain. And once you see behind the curtain that, all those factories, in this sense, the developers that Microsoft have acquired are still just busy working and they don't have a product ready for market yet, you do become impatient. Whereas Sony's going to come out strong in 2022 right out of the gate with Gran Turismo, Horizon. Sony is ready, or it appears that they're ready to really gear up the PlayStation 5 in 2022 with these big releases. Whereas with the Xbox Series X, we don't know. Will Forza Motorsport 8 be ready for next year?
Right.
Will Hellblade 2 be a release for next year? All we know at this moment is Starfield, which it could be the next big thing.
Yep.
Or it could be or it could be a blunder by Bethesda.
Yeah.
It's too early to tell.
And what if it gets delayed? I'm not saying it will. Don't quote me, but what if it does, right? then it's a bad look again, because it's kind of like Halo all over again almost. So, there's definitely momentum with Microsoft, and I think they're in a good place right now. But there's also pressure on them to really execute as well. The platform is there; they've established it. The hardware is selling well. The Game Pass is doing great for them. They've got the studios behind them. There's no excuses now. You could say, yes, COVID is still a factor, and yes, it is. And we can't discount that. And it's the ripples of COVID just continue to shock studios and cause delays. In some cases, ones that we don't even really think about. But on the flip side, studios now have dev kits. This time last year, there was all these questions around, do half these studios even have dev kits? They're developing on older Xbox One hardware, all that sort of stuff. Everyone has a dev kit now. The studios are set. They know the Xbox hardware. They know how to get the best out of it. So really, there's no excuses now. They have to start bringing these games out. And, I'm confident that we'll start to see that. And I do think we'll see Starfield next year, and we'll probably see Forza Motorsport as well come out, and maybe Hellblade will get a date as well, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft moving into 2022, especially of the two companies, Sony and Microsoft is definitely that unknown quantity. We know they have tons of developers, and they're working on ambitious projects like Fable, Hellblade 2, Perfect Dark, but we also know those are projects that are not coming in 2022. Those are 2023, 2024, titles like Avowed. There's great stuff in the pipeline. It's just that on the roadmap that Microsoft has laid out, they're years away. Whereas 2022, we have Stalker, we have Redfall, we have Starfield. 3 big games, but you need consistency, you need flow throughout the calendar year to keep people interest high. And 2021, definitely due to COVID and everything going on around the world, I can definitely see how people viewed the PlayStation 5 and even the Xbox Series X as really just a Xbox One XX or PlayStation 4 Pro, because we weren't getting those exclusives. In 2022, that should change. Microsoft's last Xbox One title should have been Halo Infinite, because officially, I believe that was the last title that they had officially announced as an Xbox One game. And now that is behind us, hopefully it means Microsoft is done with cross-generation. Everything moving forward is going to be Series X. Sony, we still know, have cross-generation games in the pipeline. But, 2022 for Sony and Microsoft is going to be an interesting year to see how things really develop in terms of next-generation output, and if we really start to see what these systems are capable of. And if 2022 is the true introduction to next generation hardware, because 2021 wasn't it. It was an appetizer of what can be. Will 2022 be the main entree, or is the entree coming in 2023? That's something we will find out in 12 months. And then we have Nintendo, who, like Sony and Microsoft, just felt as though 2021 was the year of the acquisition. And Nintendo didn't want to feel left behind, so they decided to go out and buy Next Level Games, famed developer of Mario Strikers and Luigi's Mansion 2 and 3. This was an announcement that kind of came out of nowhere. We eventually learned that the ownership of Next Level Games was looking to sell. Nintendo saw a good opportunity to acquire a talented studio that they have been working with now for nearly 2 decades, and is a perfect fit for Nintendo, and it allows Nintendo to expand their North American developer catalog by 1, because they really don't have all that many. They have Retro, Next Level Games, and NST, and they don't really make games anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo, again, like Sony and Microsoft, had a decent year, but it was definitely not their best, Overall, I think they did enough, where they could end this year feeling pretty good. They have obviously a lot of hype around next year, where we will see Pokemon Arceus. We may, I don't think we will, but a lot of people believe that Breath of the Wild 2 will be releasing next year. I don't think it will be. I still feel like it's going to fall out of next year. We will see Splatoon 3 and possibly some more Metroid next year, Nate. I think we will. I don't know.
Yes, 100%.
What fashion that will be, but I feel like we will see more Metroid next year. Mm-hmm. We may see a couple of other surprises as well. So, look, Nintendo had a decent year. There was some highlights. The acquisition of Next Level Games, I think, was pretty big for them. Some of the games that came out this year were, I thought were fantastic. Obviously, the big highlight for me was Metroid Dread. I thought it's, it was in the conversation of Game of the Year, and rightfully so. It really was the biggest game of the year for me. Now, in terms of sales, no, it was not, and I think a lot of people, haven't played a Metroid game, and, they should check out Metroid Dread, because I think it's definitely one worth checking out if you haven't. But look, overall, the Switch was, obviously sold very well. It continues to sell very well. Now, is it official that it's over 100 million now, or is we're speculating that it's probably at 100 million of the making of this episode?
Officially, it is not at 100 million as of recording. Right. It is speculative based on their Q3 forecast.
Yeah.
If they hit their forecasting numbers of Q3, it means they hit 100 million. They should be, if they're flat compared to last Q3, they should be at about 102 or 103 million end of this month.
Yeah, as expected, they're doing very well. Look, this was a, I don't want to say a tough year for Nintendo. They did enough, for this year to be a good one for them. The directs that they had were pretty low key, I would say, for the most part. But again, it's all about next year. I think, and maybe we're a little naive thinking that next year is going to be any better than this year. With delays and COVID and stuff. But I'd like to think that next year will be a bigger year for Nintendo. Potentially, one of their biggest since the launch of the Switch. But we'll have to see what comes out of that. But yeah, look, overall, the year was fine. Metroid Dread for me was the big highlight. They acquired studios just in the same way as their counterparts did as well. And look, they sold a lot of software and hardware. And obviously the Switch OLED was something of a highlight as well. I think it'll be more of the same next year, plus, some bigger games that come out, hopefully. Yeah,
2022 for Nintendo is definitely going to be a big year in terms of software. that'll be a topic that we have in January when we talk about some of our predictions and what we know for these three companies going into 2022. But for 2021, I mean, like the other two companies, it felt as though it was a conservative year in terms of software output. Nintendo leaned on titles like Skyward Sword HD. It sold well. It was the first introduction to Skyward Sword for a lot of people. Not really an overly ambitious release, but a nice safe release, something that we see from Nintendo time and time. WarioWare, a return to a franchise that has been absent for several years now. Metroid Dread, definitely Nintendo's big release this year. Though Pokemon Diamond and Pearl is selling gangbusters worldwide. But Metroid Dread was the software leader in terms of hype and anticipation and excitement from Nintendo in 2021. And, I think Dread delivered on the promise. It delivered on what it had to be. It's what Metroid fans wanted from a new Metroid game, especially a 2D Metroid game. And we will see a Metroid again in 2022. Overall, when I look at Nintendo's 2021, it felt like a year that they wanted to have something bigger, but software delays prevented them from having it. Some of these titles felt like they were slotted in as a, like, we need a release for the summer. What do we have on deck?
Yep.
We have Skyward Sword.
Yep. I totally agree with that, Nate. Like Pikmin 3 was a game that Nintendo had in their pocket that they used last year. And I feel like there was more of that this year. They had to fill some gaps with some titles, I totally agree with that.
And that's where, like, it's not a bad software year because Nintendo, like, you have Microsoft that has GamePass to fall back on. Nintendo has indie games.
I thought you were going to say the Switch Online service.
We'll get into that in a minute. Like, they have those indie games and they kind of have some late ports from third parties, but it excites because it's portable. So people are like, hey, I get to play, what's a late port that came out this year? Dragon Ball Z Kakarot on my Switch.
Right.
And that excites some people because, hey, it's finally on the platform. But it's the indies that really, like, shine for the Switch, and it introduces people to a lot of franchises they really wouldn't have otherwise, played or maybe even heard of. Nintendo output overall, it wasn't bad this year. Definitely lower key than I think you would have anticipated in normal circumstance. This is 4 years since the Switch launched. Typically, this is when you see sequels to some of the launch software. So you would have been anticipating titles like Splatoon 3 in 2021 had COVID not happened. Because it's 4 years, that's a typical development cycle. But it's coming, in the first half of next year. So you can understand how that played out. COVID pushed everything back a year, maybe 6 months. But overall, I mean, Nintendo had the year they needed. Their hardware continues to sell. Their software is selling. They're catering to the needs of their base. They're giving that core fans titles like Metroid Dread. They're giving those casual gamers stuff like Mario Golf and WarioWare, things like that. And that shows, like, that variety that Nintendo thrives on. Something that Microsoft and Sony don't have just yet in their software diversity. Nintendo has. There's always kind of something there for people to try, to test. They have that quirky game like Game Builder Garage.
Yep.
Something you would never see on the other platforms unless you want to count something like Little Big Planet where you could create stages and such, or Dreams, which unfortunately isn't on the PlayStation 5. But Nintendo's year, it felt conservative. It felt safe. It had quality, not a ton of quantity from Nintendo's first party efforts, but enough to satisfy the Switch base, unless you were looking for epics like, Breath of the Wild 2 caliber games from Nintendo. I mean, they started the year with 3D World and Bowser's Fury. Bowser's Fury definitely caught people by surprise in the scope of how the game played. A little more open in design, ambitious with some ideas. And then we kind of fell into Nintendo's typical cycle of, you have smaller key titles coming out. You have the Mario Sports game. You have the Wii U HD port in the summer. And then you end the year with the bigger titles like Metroid Dread and Pokemon. So overall, for our software output, not bad. not great 2022 should be a much better year in comparison versus 2021. But Nintendo, just like the other two, had their missteps. And their biggest misstep is the always fallible Nintendo Switch Online.
What a mess this is.
Nintendo walks up to the plate. Bases loaded. No outs. No fielders in the field but the pitcher. All they have to do is make contact. And they somehow hit into a triple play by lining out to the pitcher. Throws home, gets the out, and all of a sudden you're like, what just happened? They bring Nintendo 64 to NSO. I guess the first mistake, depending on the individual, would be the pricing. $30 a year on top of the $20 a year NSO subscription. So $50 a year to access Nintendo 64 games. To many, that price was a lot higher than anticipating. Most were expecting maybe an additional $20 for a higher subscription tier. So the pricing has been a long debate since its introduction in October. And then the quality of the games and the emulation itself. Input lag, lack of fog,
crashing, removal of save files inadvertently, emulation issues. It's just a mess, absolute mess. Now, look, I don't want to. The thing that really is something that I want to really mention is that M2 did a fine job on the Sega Genesis, and they should be commended for the work they did on their efforts, because I've actually been playing a lot of the Genesis stuff in recent times, Nate, and it's near flawless. It is very, very good. M2 are the masters of this stuff, and they did a phenomenal job. N64 is a bit of a dog's breakfast. Let's be honest. It's not great. It's in a bad state right now, and I am curious to see when Banjo-Kazooie comes out early next year whether they will address some of these issues behind the scenes. Paper Mario, when that released, they didn't really address anything. There was a couple of small things that they fixed, but the kind of low-hanging fruit, the issues that many of us have been unhappy with, have not been addressed. In fact, Paper Mario introduced the save file removal on the emulation crash as a potential issue as well. So part of me feels like maybe they should have held back on N64 and really kept it in the lab to get polished up, maybe another 6 months. And maybe they should have pivoted and released Game Boy, because we know Game Boy is some part of this service that is, again, it's probably in Nintendo's back pocket for waiting for the right time for them to launch. But I feel like maybe they should have come out of the gate with Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Genesis as the NSO service, the premium service for this year, and really just held back on the N64 stuff until, look, no emulation is perfect. There's always going to be issues. And even myself, like I'm not going to criticize a service if there's a couple of one-off quirky things. But when you've got, these deep-rooted issues with the emulation that A, can be fixed, right? And B, that these things were done because probably they wanted to get this service out as quickly as they could before the end of the year, really just makes you wonder, maybe they just should have held back a little longer on the N64 stuff and given us the Game Boy and Game Boy Color stuff first. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, N64 had only finished QA around May, if not June of 2021. And then it was announced in September, launched in October. Game Boy and Game Boy Color finished QA much, much earlier.
Right.
So that's something that Nintendo is done with. They have it in their pocket and they're waiting for the time to bring it to market. The only reason I can see that they brought N64 to market first is that they wanted to introduce the higher pricing tier.
Yeah.
They wanted to pair Genesis with N64. And maybe they wanted N64 out there to see how it was on the Switch. And when you look at like the games, Mario Kart 64, Win Back and such, you know that the expansion port is compatible. You can have either Rumble or you can have the save data. In these games, Nintendo has prioritized Rumble, which means it does kind of introduce the idea of the transfer pack.
Right.
Now, if you bring Pokemon Stadium to N64 and you bring the Game Boy games, including Pokemon, you could potentially introduce compatibility with the Game Boy game Pokemon Stadium, and you could transfer your Pokemon from the Game Boy service to this title. So maybe that's something that Nintendo was still actively working on, and they didn't want to bring Game Boy to market with the Pokemon games until Pokemon Stadium was done on N64, and they wanted to bring those at the same time. Like some sort of correlation between the two.
Yeah.
Because Game Boy emulation is finished for NSO. It's done. I get it's not that exciting. They're Game Boy games.
Well,
they're black and white.
I mean, look at the amount of hype that we've seen with the Analog Pocket in recent times.
True.
I mean, people love Game Boy games and Game Boy Color games. Some of the best games that Nintendo's ever made, let's be honest. I mean, Link's Awakening on the Game Boy Color is far and away better than the Switch Gresso version, which I think is fine, but I would much prefer the original, and I think most people would agree with that. Mario Golf for me is the best iteration of Mario Golf on the Game Boy Color out of all of them.
Yes.
You've got games like Donkey Kong 94. I mean, there is just quality and there is gold to be found on the Game Boy. It's really, for those people that haven't really experienced it, it's seeing beyond, the four colors or, in the case of the Game Boy Color, the 16 colors or whatever the color palette was. It's seeing beyond the low resolution and all that stuff. It's really about the quality of these games that were made for the system. When developers are given such a limited palette, to create art on, usually they create masterpieces because they just have so little to work with, and it really does make some of these developers really shine with the quality of work they've done. And I think the Game Boy is the best example of that. And there's just some amazing stuff on there. I know I'm probably upselling it. I get it. But look at the Analog Pocket. There is a lot of hype for the Game Boy right now. And, in some ways, Nintendo may have just launched the Game Boy and Game Boy Color stuff instead and just let the N64 stuff, leave it in the oven for a bit longer.
I mean, looking at the state of how N64 came out, there's definitely a case to be made that they should have sat on this. Let's say Game Boy and Game Boy Color, just for the sake of the discussion, is announced in March. I think had that been reversed and N64 waited till March, it would have been better for everybody. You could have got a better emulator. We got a better state of games from N64, ideally. Yep. I mean, that's not to say Nintendo wouldn't have still sat there and said, this is what we got. This is what's coming to market, the same as what we had, back in October. There's always that chance. But there's definitely just those flaws that we continue to hope that they fix. And even with Paper Mario, I believe I saw it on Twitter, that Nintendo actually changed something to make the frame rate worse on the pause menu.
Right.
Why would you intentionally go out of your way to do that?
I think it's one of those things where you touch something and it breaks something else. Emulation is very, very touchy sometimes, and then you add N64 into that mix. Look, each game is going to have its own quirks. I'm nervous about Banjo now. Like, I feel like, Banjo is a game that traditionally runs pretty well on emulation. It shouldn't have any issues. But it's not. It's also not perfect. There are parts of the game that have issues as well. So we'll see how that one plays out. And if you mentioned Pokemon Colosseum, that game really has trouble with emulation. So they have an uphill battle to get this right. But it's not something that can't be fixed. It's really now whether Nintendo is interested in doing so. And again, it goes back to what I said about Microsoft and Game Pass and backward compatible. They're little, like you said, little shinies, little cool things that you can pick up and play. And I love that. But Nintendo obviously is focused on their up and coming titles as well. So, but I guess the difference here is that people have paid good money for this service. Not to say that people don't pay money for Game Pass. They absolutely do. But people have paid money for the N64 NSO, and right now it's substandard. And look, it really is up to Nintendo to fix this. Now, whether they will, I don't really know, but hopefully they'll just silently patch this over time. And if they do, then, I'll be happy, that they've obviously listened to the feedback and they're addressing it. But I don't know, Nate. I mean, look, NSO is just a bit of a mess. I haven't touched the N64 stuff in a while since I made my video, and I haven't even played Paper Mario, to be honest, but I will probably check out Banjo on the service because hopefully they'll, it'll work well and they'll do a good job, but we'll see. For me, the highlight right now is the Genesis side, which I think is, like I said, it's near flawless.
Yeah, the Genesis stuff is, as close to perfection as you're going to get. And it's going to be interesting moving into 2022 is Sony's going to introduce their solution of offering legacy software with PlayStation 1, PS2, PSP. We know how Microsoft approaches backwards compatibility. We know how Nintendo approaches legacy software. If Nintendo ends up being the worst of the three, that's not going to look good for them. That's something that they are going to have to come up with a counter to. They have to improve their service. And NSO has its own share of problems. We're paying for peer-to-peer networking. We don't get any features. We very rarely are given any incentive to actually be subscribed to the service. That looks to be changing. We saw the Animal Crossing DLC be attached to the expansion pack. So that's definitely an avenue Nintendo is probably likely going to continue to explore moving into the future, into 2022 with other expansion packs, like be it a Splatoon 3 content pack or what have you. But when you just look at the state of these games on the service, and especially the rollout, there's no roadmap as to how these games come out. The only roadmap we've actually been given is that they happen to mention Banjo-Kazooie is coming out in January.
Right. We don't know anything beyond that, do we? Like officially.
Yeah. And it does sound like NSO in 2022 may have a surprise as far as like software release is concerned. We'll talk about that at another episode. But right now, NSO just does not feel like a product that justifies its cost. I don't even think it justifies its existence.
Nope.
Because when we look at backwards compatibility, like with the Xbox, as we mentioned, if I happen to own an Xbox version of Max Payne from 20 years ago, I put that disc in my Series X and I can play my game.
Yeah.
And I get all these added benefits
you get
that the system...
you get 60 FPS, you get auto HDR, you get some great features. Yeah, for free.
For no additional cost. Whereas NSO, and this will even be a problem with Sony, but since it doesn't exist yet, we can't talk about it. But with NSO, I'm getting a worse version of Ocarina of Time that I'm paying $30 a year to access. And is the game still quality? Is it still a good game? Yes. It should have released in a better state.
Yeah.
And that's where I look at NSO and N64 expansion pack as probably Nintendo's biggest blunder of 2021. This should have been a hype-inducing announcement. This should have been a heavily anticipated release for the Switch audience, access to N64 games, online Mario Kart 64 with friends, everything on paper sounds like a win. It's exciting. But then the execution came up short. And it's so disappointing to see a product like that come to market where you can see the potential. You know it can be great. And it just falls short for reasons beyond understanding.
Yep, well said. I totally agree with that. I mean, you know my thoughts. I've made videos on it. We've talked about it on previous episodes. Is the service is not good and it needs to improve. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that it will. So we'll have to see what the future holds.
I mean, otherwise for Nintendo's 2021, I mean, hardware sold incredibly well. They had to actually adjust their forecast because of shortages, and the demand is high. They're not going to reach the forecast that they had. They had to actually sell it a little short. They dropped it by 1 million units. But as we mentioned, I mean, the Switch will eclipse 100 million, if not already. We'll find that out in just a few weeks when Nintendo does their Q3 financial report. And I mean, it will officially have passed the Nintendo Wii. A figure I'm sure it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around that the Switch has outsold the Wii in less than 5 years.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's amazing to think about.
And because the Wii was so dominant in those first 4 years on market, but then it cratered, and it cratered hard. Whereas the Switch is not showing any signs of slowing down. But Nintendo's president has put out the statement that for early 2022, supply is definitely a concern of theirs. And they said it's really dependent on demand, whether or not they will have supply to meet the demand. So they're kind of aware of they may not be hitting the sales that they wanted, not due to any slowing down of the hardware. But I have seen some people, once again, the discussion comes up every year. Will the Switch pass the DS?
It's going to be tough. It could happen. I need to look at the trajectories again and see if that's a thing. If it doesn't, it's going to come damn close, I would say.
I mean, that's like at this point in time, it's really difficult to say because I'll give it 103 million at the end of December, just for a number. It would still have to sell 52 million units.
Right.
So people could say, oh, well, as long as it's on market for another 3 years, it could do that. Yes, at an average of 19 million units a year for the next 3 years, it would pass the DS. But think about that. An average of 19 million units for 3 years.
Right. And here's another thing I'll say. I feel like for that to happen, we need Breath of the Wild 2 next year. And that, again, I don't know if that's going to actually come out next year.
Even if you had Breath of the Wild 2 next year, you still have to factor in the idea of eventually there's going to be saturation in the market. How much more can the Japanese market really continue to buy the Switch? It's I believe it's over 22 million in the region now.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to hit 30 million in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, good question, really.
I mean, the DS was a phenomenon at its time.
Right.
It sold over 30 million units at one point, a figure that is mind-boggling. The Switch could come close, but it's tough to say in the present. I mean, Nintendo definitely had a strong 2021 in terms of hardware sales. And when you look at their software output, it appears that the Switch hardware is just very, very appealing. They don't need that Breath of the Wild 2 type of release to achieve 25 million sales. They have that evergreen catalog with Mario Kart and Breath of the Wild 1 to Pokemon to really propel sales forward. So Nintendo's definitely ending the year strong. You had Metroid Dread, Game of the Year nominee, but overall, very conservative year, very safe year. 2022 feels as though that's going to be the year that we really see Nintendo expand, take risks. And one of those risks will be made apparent in the first half of the year when Kirby comes to the Switch with a 3D Kirby. which should excite fans. I know I'm excited for it.
Me too. I can't wait for that game. I'm very, very excited about it.
So now if we had to give a quick grade to each of the companies for the 2021, what would you give Sony?
B-.
Okay. What would you give Microsoft?
A B.
And Nintendo?
B-.
Wow, you give Microsoft the edge for the year.
I think so. And look, again, maybe it's just, recency bias, or whatever you want to call it. But I've been very, very impressed with Microsoft's second half of the year. They kind of got it all together at the right time. They had a great E3. Let's not forget that. Their E3 presentation was one of the best they've had in years. Let's be honest. I mean,
yes,
a lot of people say it was their best. I don't necessarily think it was. I feel like when Peter Moore rolled up his sleeve and the GTA 4 tattoo was on his sleeve, that was pretty hype. So, we're going back a long time. Look, Microsoft came good at the right time of the year, and I feel like they just edged out Sony and Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
What are your grades?
I almost want to give Sony an incomplete.
You got to give them something. I mean, they shipped games. They bought studios. They did everything.
They did. Just wasn't the promise that they said we'd have. I mean, Sony, man, if I'm harsh on them, I come in at a C+.
Yep.
They came, and it's a C+. It was the best of their ability. It's the best they could have done, considering the circumstance. They opened strong. They just didn't end strong. They looked at titles like Kenna to kind of fill out their lineup, which is fine. They made some big acquisitions. Just curious how the acquisitions really play out for them. 2022 is going to be a much stronger year for Sony. They did what they had to do in 2021. Microsoft, they leaned so heavily on Game Pass, and they didn't have that banger of a title until Forza Horizon 5, and then have Halo. So you definitely have recency bias at play. If I'm harsh on Microsoft, I come in with a strong C.
Mm-hmm.
Not a bad year. Again, best they could have done, considering everything. Nintendo, I come in at a B-.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely agree there, I think, on Nintendo. Yeah. They had a solid lineup of games throughout the calendar year. Nothing was earth-shattering.
Yes,
Metroid was the big game for me.
Right.
And that's my preference. A lot of people didn't even buy Metroid, right? A lot of people don't care about it, but I really enjoyed it. And I think, like you said, you brought up a great point that Nintendo delivered something for everyone. You could, for me, the big two highlights were probably the two that sold the least, and that was Game Builder Garage and Metroid Dread. But someone else probably really loved Mario Golf. I didn't play Mario Golf. I didn't really think it was that appealing on the Switch. But that's the great thing about the Switch, that yes, there is something for everyone, and I think Nintendo did enough in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's where when I view Nintendo like this, it's just that safe year. They had a lot of variety. They just didn't have that banger of a release. They didn't have that whoa game. They didn't have the Halo or the Forza or the Returnal or the Ratchet. Dread was the closest thing they had to it, and Dread may be that caliber for some people. And I mean, it's a fantastic game, one of the best games of the year, but it's Metroid. It just doesn't have that appeal that like a big new Mario game would have had, or even Splatoon 3 or a Fire Emblem or something of that tier. Metroid just isn't that upper echelon of Nintendo franchises. And as you mentioned, Metroid just isn't that big of a title to so many people. It was a quality release. It just wasn't that megaton game in terms of optics. But I mean, for Nintendo to come in at a B-, at this point of a generation and have the year they've had in terms of hardware sales, I mean, I think that's a strong grade for them at this point.
I agree. So
2022 will probably be much higher.
Last question about Nintendo from me. Will we see, and I want to say it doesn't matter what it is, will we see new hardware from Nintendo next year?
Release or announced?
Announced.
Oh, man.
And that could even be like a Switch Lite OLED.
So, like, yeah.
I mean,
Switch Lite
it could be
OLED.
anything. Are we going to see a new SKU announced next year?
I mean, I'd say there exists the chance, yes, we see an announcement of some kind. But that'll be something we can go into a little more in a predictions video for 2022.
You heard it here first. There may be new hardware announced next year. I think we'll probably see, like, I think the OLED Switch Lite is something that I keep thinking about. Maybe they're gonna start looking at.
It just seems like a natural move for them to make. Or you would think.
You would think, but we'll see. It's Nintendo. They like to surprise, so we'll see what happens next year.
You know what else is surprising? Getting 20% off and free shipping with the code NateTheHate at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use the code NateTheHate. And be sure to treat your balls to a Happy New Year. We can go into some of the Streamlabs questions for this week. And our first question comes from Lee, who donated $2.65 and writes, "Greetings from the UK, guys. Is there anything stopping Microsoft implementing an Xbox and Xbox 360 emulator that would only play physical media at the original resolution and frame rate? No upscale, no FPS boost, no way to purchase in the store?" It continues, where Lee donated an additional $2.65 and continued to write, "This would just be a game player similar to a CD and DVD player for music and film. The question, then, is it worth it to Microsoft if they can't monetize the effort required? Also, you guys have you guys checked out the Games Master reboot on YouTube? MVG YNWA.
Oh, You Never Walk Alone. He's a Liverpool fan. So there's a lot of questions there. I'll try to answer them as best I can. So, look, it doesn't make sense if Microsoft just had an emulator where you put the disc in and it played the games at the same resolution, because I think you kind of touched on it, that they do want to monetize this stuff, right? Like they you know, if they're going to offer a backward compatible service, you know, they're going to want to somehow make money off of that. Now, like right now, their back compat service, you don't need GamePass to run games backward compatible. So technically speaking, they're not making anything off that service at all. But I don't really think it makes any sense for them to offer an emulator that just plays the game at the original resolution. I would almost take a leaf out of Don Matrick's book and say, if you want to do that, just buy a 360 or an OG Xbox. There's still millions of them out there, and you're going to get the best experience on those systems anyway. But look, if you want that upscale, that auto HDR, the potential of double the frame rates and all the bells and whistles, then you want to jump on the Series S and the Series X.
Indeed. Then had a $1 donation from Jackie G, who writes, "What games do you currently have pre-ordered?"
None. I literally have no games pre-ordered.
Yeah, I don't typically pre-order games unless it's like a collector's edition or something that I want. Otherwise, I just go to the store the day it comes out and buy it.
Yep.
We then had a $1 donation from Jackie G, who writes, "Bonus question this week. Since I'm furious at the Halo physical copy situation, is it fair to say that Microsoft only included a disk drive on the Series X for the sake of third parties? They clearly don't care about collectors on Xbox, and it's really sad."
Oh, that's a. I mean, we could talk about this for 30 more minutes, but here's what I will say. Microsoft's future is Game Pass, cloud, and digital distribution. You can come to any conclusions you like based on that information.
Well said. Then had a $3.95 donation from Matanume, who writes, has anyone actually tried running a music CD in a PS5? When was the last time you bought an album? I can confirm in the Xbox VCR, it runs an app called Groove Music and can pause the in-game music to play over while still keeping sound effects.
I can tell you that since the PlayStation 4, so the PS4, the PS4 Pro, and the PS5 cannot play CDs. And that includes music CDs and any other CDs. So, for example, a PlayStation 1 disc will not read. And the reason is simply because Sony removed the CD laser from the DVD drive. So there is physically no way you can play CDs on that hardware.
Damn Sony cutting features.
Cutting costs, man.
Then had a $2.37 donation from Matanume, who writes, I'm so excited to find this out. I can now play Banjo-Kazooie to the music I strangely associate to it. 90s Seattle grunge. I've wondered, is Banjo Wooden Jesus? Maybe.
I was waiting for you to respond to that because I have no idea how to answer that question.
I never listened to Seattle's 90s grunge music like Nirvana, so it wasn't really my cup of tea. We then had a $1 donation from Auric305, who writes, inspired by Jackie G's album question last week, do either of you have a game soundtrack that helped shape or change your taste in music? For my then young self, it was Tony Hawk 1 and 2 and NHL 2004.
Ooh, I would say there's probably two for me that come to mind. Chrono Trigger is obviously one that is very, very well known. But lesser known is the Turrican series by Chris Hülsbeck. I'm a big fan of that soundtrack. All three games have just amazing soundtracks. So those two would be my picks for me.
I mean, if I had to pick a game that's music shaped, like the music I would listen to on the day, I mean, I guess I would say maybe Life is Strange kind of introduced some unique folk music that I wouldn't have, even like kind of alternative pop music that I probably never would have listened to otherwise. So maybe Life is Strange. Then had a $5 donation from Zadia Quest, who writes, this may be a bit on the technical side, but if I had to create a Switch 2 without sacrificing portability, what would be some things I could improve?
I mean, we've talked about what we would like to see in a newer Switch model throughout the year, but just to recap, and Nate, I'm sure you'll have your own thoughts, but more RAM, more performance, more storage space, better network infrastructure. I mean, that's just a low-hanging fruit. Obviously, 4K capabilities. I didn't say native 4K, but the ability to render at 4K. Just things like that, fix the Joy-Con drift issues. Just take a look and see what's holding the Switch back and improve on those features.
Yeah, I mean, the way mobile technology has advanced, all you'd really have to sacrifice is, I mean, depending on the size of the product, would really be higher end features. Like if you want ray tracing in handheld mode, you would have to consider the impacts it would have on battery life. So that would have to be a discussion based on the size of the battery you're going to have in the device, what type of screen you're going to have, and what type of energy draw that's going to have. So a lot of it would really come down to what the battery would be that you having the device would allow you to actually get in terms of features and performance. Because, I mean, mobile technology can do a lot of things. Phones, tablets can produce amazing visuals, but you also have to consider the size of the battery that's in these devices and how some of them will only get a couple of hours of pure gaming performance before either they overheat or the battery drains. So that would really just come down to battery, I would say. But otherwise, as MVG said, you could get 4K DLSS. You could do a lot and keep portability. Then I had a $3 donation from Jared Helder. Right. Recently, I was made aware of how much game development happens in China, with Horizon Zero Dawn cited as an example. With a lot of this hidden from the public, do you know anything about this topic and the developers' work conditions? I do not.
I don't. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, look, these stories you don't really hear anything about until you read a Bloomberg article or something, about really bad conditions at some studio or something. But I've heard nothing on this one.
No, I mean, a lot of the Chinese studios are definitely like the external asset type of studios. A lot of developers utilize them to some capacity, but work conditions, no, have no information on that. And because it's China, it would probably prove difficult to get reliable information and consistent information to form a really cohesive report. Then had a $1 donation from Foul Tarnished. Right, what is holding back a Chrono Trigger Switch port? What is going on behind the scenes between Square and the other interested parties? The only thing holding it back is Square. Square would be the thing holding back Chrono Trigger and just the parties involved. I mean, if they want to make it happen, I'm sure they can make it happen. Maybe they have plans with Chrono Trigger that in the future where they want to do something bigger with it, or they just for some reason don't want to revisit it. I mean, they put it on the PC and that version was rough when it launched. There's usually always a reason behind this. Companies like Square aren't just sitting there saying, man, a lot of people want Chrono Trigger, let's not give it to them. There's usually a reason, and they know better than us. We then had a $5 donation from Derek Clay, who writes, I'm thinking that Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4 will be pushed back to release as launch titles for the Switch 2. There's precedent for such a move, and it would give the system 2 highly anticipated titles right out of the gate. Thoughts? There's definitely precedent set with a Zelda title being a cross-generation release. We've seen it with Twilight Princess. We saw it with Breath of the Wild. Metroid Prime 4, I wouldn't be surprised if that did get pushed back to the next Switch at this rate. Probably not as a launch title, probably even later than launch. But, I mean, Breath of the Wild 2, I would say it has that possibility. As you mentioned, there is a precedent there. It just comes down to when Nintendo opts to bring new Switch hardware to market. And if their plan is late 2022 or early 2023, there's definitely a chance Breath of the Wild 2, it could be slated as that launch title or attractive launch window game. But right now, it's really hard to say if that is what's happening behind the scenes at Nintendo. Even with Breath of the Wild, they only decided to bring that to the Switch around 12 months before the hardware was actually confirmed internally for 2017. So even Nintendo kind of makes these decisions fairly late in the game. And that is the final Streamlabs question for this week. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a Streamlabs link in our description below. Ask a question, donate any dollar amount, and we will answer it at the end of the episode. And I'd like to thank MVG for joining me, as always.
Always a pleasure, Nate. Have a safe and happy New Year, and I will see you and the listeners in 2022.
Yes, and you As well, have a safe and happy New Year, and everyone listening, have a safe and happy New Year celebration. We will see you in 2022 with some prediction episodes and lots of new content. And thank you for all the support you have shown us over the course of 2021. We appreciate it. And until next time, continue to embrace the hate.